think it's asking me for permission to,
Yeah, I'm gonna make you a host as soon as I finish the live stream, and then you'll be able to record.
Okay.
Okay, 1 second, so you're officially live on YouTube right now. We're gonna put the link in the swap card. And we're officially live on swap card. I'm gonna make you a host. Great, cool. Alrighty, thank you, Alma, for that. So, all right, hi everyone. Thank you all for joining our FOIA and Schools panel. We are one of 2 of the last panels here for FOIA Fest. So we are ending this 3-day marathon. So thank you all for joining us. For those of you watching on Swap Card, thank you for also sticking through. Really appreciate this. So just going over quick logistics here. If you're watching on Swap Card, as you already know, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to engage with the live discussion in the event page. And then Alma here, who's our lovely volunteer, will be transferring those questions from the live discussion into our Zoom chat. So closer to like 20 minutes before the panel ends, we'll get started on those questions. And we're really hoping to have a conversation here. My name is Kelly Garcia. I use she, her pronouns. I am a freelancer covering education mostly. I've been doing this for less than a year. I am a City Bureau Civic Reporting Fellow. I covered the budget during the fall. And then, I'm also an organizer of 44 Neighbors for Justice. And I co-chair the Education Committee. And I'm happy to be here, happy to be coordinating FOIA Fest as well. So without further ado, I want to allow our panelists to introduce themselves as well. So how about we go in the order of my screen? I have Sammy, Chris, and Ade. How about that?
That's cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Smiley. I use she and they pronouns. I'm a state education reporter at Chalk Beat Chicago, a nonprofit news organization covering K-12 public education. We have several bureaus around the country. I usually cover the State Board of Education, the state legislature, and 10 of the largest school districts throughout the state. And then I do a little special education reporting around Illinois. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Chris Bridges. I am program counsel at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I have recently joined them about a month ago. I'm excited to be here, work on the Ed Equity team, where we primarily focus on issues addressing anti-school to prison pipeline advocacy. So happy to join this conversation and look forward to the discussion.
Oh, it's me. Hi, I'm Adeshina Emmanuel. I'm the editor-in-chief at Injustice Watch. We're a nonprofit newsroom here that focuses on investigative journalism and public service journalism. And in a past life, I was an education reporter at Chalk Beach, Chicago, at the same bureau that Samantha works at. And I've covered schools also at DNA Info in another past life. Well, these are all the same life, but yeah, so I've been around.
Cool. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. So yeah, for some context around what's conversation is really going to be about is really looking at how we use FOIA to talk about public schools, how to obtain public records, how to use them. I know we have a lot of non-journalists in the audience as well. So really looking at how we use FOIA to advance equity in public schools as well. So again, feel free to engage in the live discussion for the panel. To get us started, I really wanted to hear from all of you. I know we have a mix of journalists and lawyers here. So how do you use FOIA in the work that you do related to education?
You want me to start first? Okay. So for my work at the state level, in general, I usually request a bunch of like data on like who's working at like schools or enrollment data, transfer data, like how much money a school district receives from the state, things like that. And I also request information over time. So I try to get things that's like 2015 up until now, just to see if there's a pattern. Since we're in this pandemic, and I started my job March 2nd, so things have been just wild since I started my job, and you know, school started closing very quickly, and then we had to start covering CARES Act funding, which was, I believe, $13.2 billion for education. Illinois received over $560 million. 512 of those dollars were given to school districts around the state. And so for a while, like every bureau in Chalkbeat needed to figure out like how much money their state was receiving, how much school districts were receiving, what was the state doing with the money that they were supposed to keep, and then what the governor was doing with that money. And then can't remember if this was in April, early April, or also around the same time, but the former United States Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, had a rule where she was like, hey, public schools have to give some of their funding to non-public schools or private schools. And the rule was based on like, you can either give the money, you know, based on enrollment, total student enrollment, or the number of children who or students who who are from working class households or low income households. And that just that was really a huge thing because maybe some people know, but like schools were already struggling financially before the pandemic happened. And then the pandemic happened and these school districts had to close their schools or start buying personal protective equipment or computers or iPads for early learners, Wi-Fi, things like that, and it was just like a lot of money, and school districts were like, we need as much money as we can get, and some of the money has been used to kind of help that school's budget, and so it was just like very shocking when this rule was made, and so my Chalkbeat had been covering this like everywhere. National had multiple stories about it. Michigan had a story because Michigan was involved in a multi-state lawsuit around this that Chicago joined because Chicago was like, wait a minute, we're gonna have to give about 18 to about $26 million, depending on like how this is, depending on what pot of money we have to give. And yeah, that was a very complicated story. I don't know if you have questions about that, if I was able to explain that pretty well. But yeah, it was a very complicated story. And I had to file I filed one FOIA that basically asks for like how much school districts will receive. 10 largest school districts received from the CARES funding, and then how much each one of those school districts have to give to non-public schools. And then I asked for like the state's application. So, and I received about 9 of those applications back. Chicago didn't have an application that was approved, but they had already disclosed how much money was supposed to be given away. And that was like what my FOIA looked like. And I was able to get it back in a reasonable amount of time. It did take a couple of weeks, but I did get it at a reasonable time.
Cool, thank you, Sammy. Yeah, Chris and Ade, how do you all use FOIA in the work that you do?
I'll go. So I think broadly, I'd say in the past, I've used FOIA to gain insights, I guess in several areas. One, I'd say like, you're trying to gain insights into decision making at the district level. If we're talking about Chicago, if there is a pot of money and there's a RFP, I'm sorry, there's like some, call for proposals for, programs. It's like, well, who got the programs, and trying to understand, for example, like what applications came in, what were on applications, what was the decision making that decided how resources were sort of, allocated. I think that when I was at Chalkbeat, I spent a lot of time filing FOIAs trying to understand, especially as the district was pressing on issues of equity and had founded an Office of Equity. It was something where I think a lot of, there's two ways to approach how you use FOIA in that scenario. One, looking a little bit deeper than the school data that might be publicly available will give you at things like discipline, things like AP courses, thinking about even like emergency transfers and, sort of like police notifications, and getting more granular than sort of the big aggregate, right? At like, well, are these students in special education who are, I guess, boys or Black boys, of a certain age or at a certain grade level, getting more granular. So for example, if you're looking at suspensions or something, when you see growth at a school, getting like demographic splits of that growth to see how, I remember writing a story about a school in Bronzeville where there was a lot of growth, but some of that growth was uneven, and it was more so driven by the Black girls at the school, while the Black boys were sort of still struggling in lots of ways. And, so it's something where I've tried to gain insights, I think, into equity and decision-making, again, at a time where everyone is saying that their decisions are for the sake of equity. Also, I'd say investigating, looking into people who work in schools. It's difficult to get records on incidents, let's say, between police and youth. We all know like it's a huge barrier in FOIA, and there are protections that are there for good reason. But for folks who want to have more insight into what these interactions look like between police and youth, it's very problematic and troublesome not to be able to gain some idea of a narrative, though things make it to lawsuits and to the news, and there's, things that get out. I found it fairly opaque, trying to understand the actual interactions between police and schools. But I think that looking into the backgrounds of the police officers who are in schools, there are other interactions outside of, schools, and that's something that we've done a little bit of it at Injustice Watch. Yeah, so I think that those are some ways that I've like used FOIA. How do we want to, also there's questions here. Am I supposed to answer one of these questions or?
We can wait until like 20 minutes before, and then we can take questions. But yeah, thank you, Adi. That was a lot of experience that you have with FOIA there, especially in the district. Chris, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so similar to what Adi and Samantha said, we use FOIA requests in a very similar way. So from a legal standpoint, FOIA requests can be used to get really important data to be able to understand what's happening within a district, what's happening at the school level, what's happening at the county level, et cetera. And so we're able to take that data and be able to construct not only a fact-finding kind of mission and narrative around what's happening at these schools, but we're also able to determine whether or not there's enough meat there for us to perhaps file litigation or file some kind of suit to try and correct any harms that we might be able to glean from that data. And so FOIA requests are incredibly important in terms of providing that data and allowing us to get a really granular look at what's happening in schools. Throughout the country, Black and brown students are suspended, and expelled throughout public schools throughout the country. So again, finding these data and these disparities in data and treatment of students is a way for lawyers and the legal community to try and provide some kind of teeth and redress to students who are being unfairly treated. In addition to that, it's also a way to figure out what schools are actually doing to address any disparities or discrepancies rather, or disparities in their classrooms. If you have schools that are discussing or talking about implementing different programs and procedures to try and address the over suspension expulsion of Black and Brown students, for example, FOIA requests can help provide some information about what exactly are they doing, what kind of programs are they implementing in those schools, what kind of actions are being taken through administration to try and address concerns that community members might be raising in those particular schools or districts. So FOIA requests provide a lot of information that once aggregated and really looked through can provide some great insight into what's happening at schools and figure out what advocates can do from there to try and address any issues that might be present.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. So let's start the conversation here. So I know, Sammy, you mentioned, you work with a lot of different school districts, and you were also filing FOIA requests to the state and also Department of Education. So for all of you, really, what is that process of actually filing a FOIA request through either a school district, the state board, or Department of Education in the case of Sammy? And with that, like, what does transparency look like, especially when it comes to incidents of police in schools, right? A lot of this information is probably not accessible because they don't want it to be. So what does that process look like for you all? How do you all go about actually obtaining those records?
Let me see. So, I think it can be true. I mean, I guess having an understanding of how a particular government body like works at several levels kind of gives you maybe clues about like what's a FOIA and how to FOIA. I think about I like to look at what data, information, a public body, anybody, in this case, the school district, what do they release publicly, and what can I obtain or ascertain or determine from that? And then what are some of the clues about underlying information that might actually be there? Or what are the things that aren't there or that I wonder about, So, I think that I often start with, we're often looking for data, like Chris says. And in all cases, I mean, we're looking data, thinking of it as just structured information of any sort, right? So, I mean, excuse me. So, I think that I do start with sort of a research phase. I start with certain big questions, and a FOIA is a vehicle to help you, answer the question. So I look at also several other ways I could potentially answer the question to make sure FOIA is absolutely what I need to do here. I think that once I get to that point, I like to consult. I like to talk with someone who understands the information I'm trying to get, who's tried to get it. I might fish around and see if other, honestly, folks like, Chris, like, they might have put a FOIA in or issued a report or had information where I'm like, oh, wow, it might not have been used journalistically or thought of in that way, but it gives me insights into how to, or it might even, gives me insights into how to scale and focus like a FOIA. So I think that, that's like very general, but then like the crafting of it, I mean, I do think that FOIA writing is a bit of an it's a bit of an art, and it can be kind of I mean, you want to be exhaustive and make sure you're not leaving too many holes through which people can deny, things people can use to deny you information. I think that it's tricky to do that while also being specific, while also not being too vague to where they can kind of give you whatever and it's like not in the form you want the data. So, I think that I just really try to balance that, and I get a lot of advice about that from people who have done it and try to see what's worked or not. And I think that from there, you actually try to craft something as nice. I probably never send a FOIA out without having somebody else read it or getting somebody else's feedback on it. Preferably, and it depends sometimes on your network. Like there are journalists who I might be able to call up as friends and just ask them to look at it. There's other people where you feel like it's like free labor or consultation, and you might not have that relationship. But there are a lot of resources and people who are, I think, passionate about this topic of education. So I think in Chicago, I've never really had trouble finding someone whether it was a lawyer or another journalist or anybody interested in the information with giving me some insight. But the best thing is to kind of be able to talk to the FOIA officer or public information officer and understand a little bit more about on the back end what it actually looks like for them pulling the information, which can be tricky depending on the relationship and depending on the public body. They may not be that responsive. I won't name any names, but I could, that'd be fun. But yeah, I think the story obviously comes in somewhere. I mean, you're ideally doing this with a story in mind or a question that is something that you want to report. There's a need for the information that you want to report back to people. So I often also like try to make sure I'm not getting too in the weeds with what I'm requesting, that it's just beyond, it's not tethered to a specific point of impact or concern in the community, or I think that I try to base a lot of FOIAs off just people's curiosity and what I know people want to know that they could benefit from knowing. Sorry for looking off camera a little bit. Obviously, it's weird. We're like virtual or whatever. I'm just here thinking. But yeah, that's an answer.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of what Adi shared, which is there are several different kind of levels to submitting the FOIA request and kind of thinking about the strategy in doing so and what the art of composing it looks like. And so, like Adi said, a lot of great points. I think it's important to actually see what's publicly available before even trying to submit a FOIA. It's kind of with the old adage of work smarter, not harder, just seeing what's out there. And in doing that, you're actually able to then narrow down what it is you actually want to request in a FOIA request. So when you're actually submitting the FOIA request, you'll have a better understanding idea of what information is not publicly available and what it is that you want to try and obtain from a potential public body. Anybody in Illinois or not even a citizen of Illinois can submit FOIA requests. So that's something important to think about. Everybody has the ability to do so, but it has to go to a public body. And so when you're thinking about, again, what you're hopefully trying to obtain in terms of information, it's important to think about which public body is the right person or entity to try and reach out to, and what information or documents they might have within their control or supervision. Again, most or many of these public entities have FOIA officers and actually a FOIA help page. So if you actually Google FOIA and the particular public entity, you'll actually probably be able to find information that provides some insight onto how best to submit a FOIA to that particular agency. But generally, you don't have to stick to a script that they provide. You can actually just write a FOIA request on your own and submit it that way. It's really important, though, to, again, be specific and narrow in what it is that you're looking for, because public entities can actually respond and say, we don't know what you're talking about. This request is too broad, so we're not going to be able to help you. Or, there's just too much information that you're requesting. There's no way that we can reasonably produce this amount of information to you. We can't help you. So again, it's important to kind of do your research at the onset and figure out what you're really trying to seek, and then trying to figure out, how to narrow and make very specific and detailed requests about the information that you're seeking. Detailed includes, instead of saying, I'm looking for student discipline records at such and such school, say I'm looking for student discipline records at such and such school from 2017 to 2020, March 3rd through May 5th or something to that extent. So being specific and clear about what you're looking for can be very helpful in terms of trying to get that information.
Yeah, what everyone said was great. Definitely see what's available. Even when you find certain information that's available, like see what's missing, which is what Ade said. Look at FOIA logs. I try to, as a reporter, when I'm filing FOIAs, I try not to put what I actually want to say in the attached box that they have, so someone else can't read what I'm looking for. But I do go and look and see what everybody else put. And then I'll go and find like the academics that I want to talk to, or the advocate that I want to talk to who might file the FOIA that I was thinking about filing. Just see what they got and what type of research that they're doing with that information. And I would also say, for me on the state side, the state likes to use a lot of jargon. So you kind of want to look at some of their documents to see how they're talking about things. I also follow them on Twitter just to see what they're like posting to communicating to their superintendent, so I can kind of go back and put that in the FOIA, like, you said like you have this information in this application. I know you have this application because you tweeted about it. So I also, like, when I'm requesting information on certain school districts, like I'll use the way that they have it in their school report card. So I do not put like, I want to know this information about Chicago Public Schools. I put, I want to know this information about City of Chicago School District 299, because that's what's in their data set already. So that's a lot of work, but like once you start learning how they talk about things and you know where they publicly hold stuff, it just makes it a lot easier for them to not deny you or tell you like, we don't know what you're talking about. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of, wanting to be more specific and narrowing your request, how do you all navigate privacy restrictions when it comes to student records? Because that's unique to schools. So how do you all do that?
Well, I've been able to have some access to records through the consent, though, of youth or families, well, families rather, and parents, such as records around, like, let's say someone's IEP or their academic record, even like a psychological evaluation. But I think that those aren't the sorts of things that you could get really easily without that, consent, of course. It's tricky. I think that more so than records about youth, which we know are in a lot of cases, we can only kind of get them de-identified, certain types of information. I think that the relationship and like the engagement with actual families and young people and parents and teachers is, people who feel like there are records that you should see, you should find, or records that you should have access to, and if there's some good behind that. I found that FOIA has not, it's very difficult to get. I mean, again, for good reasons, there's lots of protections around information about youth, but I've just found that where I have had breakthroughs, it's been, I think, through the openness of community members and folks who wanted you to look into something about their kid, like especially in special education. I use that example because I think that's where I've been able to obtain records that I wouldn't have through FOIA because there was some need or some vulnerability that and some challenge that a family was facing. And it sort of helped me find answers or understand more about what was happening to them. So yeah, that's kind of like the privacy thing. It's not really much you can do about a law. I mean, I will say, despite the law, I've also gotten police records and court records where youth were supposed to be protected, where their names were not supposed to be there, even victims of sexual assault, where it's, I mean, like I said, there are good reasons why we protect certain people. So I also find things like that particularly frustrating to see when you're being denied, records that could give you insight into issues. But folks who actually should be protected, it seems like their information is leaking and getting out there here and there, especially in that specific case I mentioned. But yeah.
I'll just add real briefly that there's obviously, a lot of concern around making sure that people's privacy is respected, certainly through FOIA requests. And so one of the ways that we at CLC try to handle that or address that is by just making an outright request that any personally identifiable information be redacted and not provided in our FOIA request. We make it very clear in that request. And then we also ask that if the entity thinks that there might be some personally identifiable information provided in the batch of documents that we're seeking, can they point us to a different location where we can get the same data without the personal information? Another kind of offshoot of that is reaching out to parents and students and getting their consent to look at personal documents, and then trying to figure out or put pieces together that way in terms of what information you might be able to collect from the different kind of places.
Cool. So in thinking about navigating that, both Chris and Ade have mentioned wanting to get consent, right, from the students and families that you're seeking information about. So like, what other tools have you used besides FOIA to find information? Slash, like, sometimes you find yourself like having to build that trust. Like, what does that building that trust with the communities that you're reporting on look like when filing that FOIA?
Well, I remember once upon a time at Chalkbeat, when I worked at Chalkbeat, how we launched the Chicago Bureau with this sort of listening tour that we did over the summer. And one of the examples I used of like having consent with a family, and they sort of use records and know about their personal information. It came about through making a connection at a round table, like a panel, a conversation with parents about how they had been advocating for youth under their, in their charge, who were receiving special education services at CPS. So, I think that it was something where there is this process of, we were in this process together of creating value and meaning, and trying to understand resilience. And it was something where we were asking people what problems they encountered and how they tackled them. And I think that there was a less extractive approach than a lot of journalists take in that us sitting down and passing them the mic and just listening, and then following up and saying, this is why you're talking to us, this is why we want this information, and that it's a more collaborative process, So I feel like that approach is what wins ultimately. Like you have to be in a relationship with folks, you can't just sort of be swooping in to extract or really not say benefit, but like, it's like we're leveraging, it's like we have folks' vulnerability and everything that they're suffering in oppressive systems, and I think it's not to be treated cheaply. And I think that when people understand that you understand their story is valuable and you tell them it matters and it's affirmed in that, I think it's a little bit easier. And then reputationally, you'll have more people who trust you. And there's a lot of need out here for people to trust, who are folks like all of us on this call, lawyers, journalists, especially in the education sphere. So, I mean, I think that these are long-term relationships, right? Yeah, I'm sure Sam could speak to like some of that and how I don't know. I mean, I haven't been an education reporter for like a year or more. And during the pandemic, I can't imagine. I mean, it's very difficult to engage folks. So my answer is like assuming that things are perfectly normal. It's not a current answer, I guess. It's a bit dated, because I don't know like how folks are doing that now.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's really difficult now. Prior to coming to Chalkbeat, I was a community reporter. So I worked in Hyde Park, Woodlawn, and then sometimes I would report on South Shore. And there I would just go to every meeting I could, and I would run into the same folks, and I would talk to people. I shopped in the neighborhood, so people knew me, knew how I looked, because some people would know my name but didn't know my face. And so and trying to break like these perceptions of who I am because of my name, whatever. And it was way easier then. And now it's like, coming to Chalkbeat as a state reporter, it's like not only do I have to talk to, Chicago families, using some of the families that I talked to and engaged with in Hyde Park and Woodlawn, But now I also have to talk to families at some of the other school districts that I am like that I'm reporting on, and I just kind of look like, using Facebook, using Twitter, trying to talk to the advocates who are like more visible, because they're, probably a nonprofit organization, and kind of using them to get to families, which it's fine for now, but it is like, I don't really enjoy it. I really miss meeting people in person. um I find it okay to like talk to a family over Zoom. That's sometimes what I do, so I can see like how somebody's room is set up, or like what their day might look like as they're going to classes and stuff. But I really just miss like being in a classroom. I miss talking to families. I miss going to those evening uh you know uh LSC meetings and all that stuff. So yeah. That wasn't really an answer, but I tried.
No, yeah, that was great. Thank you. So before we turn it over to questions from the audience, one final question from me, and really this is just thinking about a lot of the parents and teachers and community members that I've had the honor to meet in the last year that are interested in filing their own FOIA requests, but are maybe first timers and don't know how to do that. But also specifically within Chicago Public Schools, where we see a lot of retaliation happen against teachers and parents, and a culture of fear of even wanting to like learn more about your own school district, your own school community. What advice and just tips do you have for folks in the audience who might want to know how to file a FOIA request related to their own school community?
Guess that one's for me. I would recommend folks who are fearful of retaliation or fearful of submitting a request, try and find a nonprofit agency similar to the Chicago Lawyers Committee, and consult with them, talk to them, share what your concerns are, and see if they're able to file that on your behalf. That's an easier way of trying to, one, get the information without being personally attacked and personally identified. So yeah, that would be the simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a word, I feel like just solidarity and finding another person. Like, it's like we're talking about answering questions, right? And with a FOIA, right? So it's like we don't want to get lost too much in the process. The process is so important, but it starts with the question, And I think that when you have those questions in your household, in your child's just experience, and I've experienced this with my nephew in CPS, honestly, you might be surprised what you find when you voice that to even one other parent, or, and I think that like showing up and asking the question and trying to force that as a conversation somehow is like a good place to start. And then from there, just like what Chris said, I mean, there is value, and I mean, there are folks out here who want to help you answer those questions, who are trying to figure out what are good questions to answer, to ask in the first place. I think that just like how I don't necessarily send a FOIA alone, like everything in my process was dependent on other people. And the fact that I'm not recreating the wheel, that there's some continuity I'm building on. This is a collective inquiry. So I think that's my answer, really, that like it needs to be, I think that if you have like obviously if you are someone who has the means to hire a lawyer or go find somebody, you can FOIA away. And lots of folks, I remember reporting a story at Ogden School, a lot of the folks there were lawyers themselves. So they were, launching FOIAs left and right. I mean, I think that it depends on who we're talking about, especially. And I think that for the different communities that are underserved, who might feel the fear of retaliation, or who might feel like the system they're trying to navigate isn't one that's made for them or made for them to understand, that's where it's like, how do you get out of that? How do you get out of that and sort of start to ask the questions yourself? I think the answer is going to be like, it's a collective question. I think finding other folks is kind of the thing, but on an individual level, I could say like what, there are resources out there like FOIA resources. You can probably Google around and find like different resources that will tell you the gist of it. But for your specific case, you're always going to need to talk to someone who knows, some or share some of the same concern, who can kind of help you build on a question that you can form into a FOIA. I don't know if that's a real answer, but I think there also should be more resources and more entities like, journalistic, legal, and otherwise that are dedicated to answering the question you just asked, Kelly, which I think is a really good one, because for some people, they don't feel like there's an answer to that. Like, how do they really get started? How do they wrap their head? I think it's a good question for all of us to kind of continue to help answer too. But hopefully someone has, I don't know if there's some more concrete responses. That was a little bit abstract, I think.
Just want to add real quick, and sorry, Sam, if you wanted to jump in. I think two things that Adi shared or raised were really great and really important, which is sometimes just building a relationship with the people that you're trying to get information from is your easiest path to getting that information. So, if you're ready to file a FOIA, but you haven't even talked to the people at the school, and then all of a sudden they're getting this request from somebody that they don't know, who may or may not seem like they're just trying to throw, some extra work their way. Not, that might not be what's happening, but that might be how they feel. That could maybe cause some hiccups or delay in you getting the information you want. Some of these folks might actually be willing to give you the information if you just ask. And then the second piece, I don't want to scare folks away. You don't have to hire Chicago Lawyers Committee or other legal nonprofits, because we're not paid by the community. So feel free to reach out to folks, even just to ask questions or get assistance. And we certainly will try to help. And I encourage you, doing Google searches or whatever to figure out what kind of legal nonprofits are operating in your area, because they can support you in many ways beyond submitting FOIA requests. And it might be useful just to have their information in your pocket.
Cool. So let's go over these questions from the audience. So first question, does anyone here work in higher education?
I do some higher ed stuff, but that's in relationship to teacher prep programs. Not so much, so I don't spend my time on campuses or talking to students on campuses. I kind of just know these are the standards that teacher prep programs should have. Like, I know it's in the news that a lot of people are upset about these culturally relative teaching standards that the state has just introduced. And so I had to, figure out what that even meant. And that's kind of what I worked on. We'll be doing more work to see what does that look like in practice.
I mean, I've done work around college readiness, and some of the data that you might look at, to sort of look at like college completion rates and whatnot. And I've maybe written some about financing, I guess like some of the money issues or whatever, but that was like years ago. But I wouldn't call myself a higher ed reporter.
Same. I would primarily focus on K through 12.
Cool. Next question from Joanna. Do you encounter situations where the turnaround time to receive your FOIA request is so long it renders the data unusable, impertinent?
Yeah, that's happened. I think that's like the thing with FOIA, right? That's what sometimes they're trying to do. They're hoping, right? I think having a question that, there's some bigger picture questions about how things were handled that don't just go away because you delay me, I think that CPS has seen that to be true. There's a lot of scandals and things that come up. It's like there's a delay. Ultimately, I think there are things though that have been unusable. A lot of it was like what's happening right now. I think I was looking into a school merger, and there were some concerns about racial equity and how discipline was being distributed, and who were the people who were emergency transfers from the school and why. And yeah, you're in the middle of a semester trying to gain insight and you don't get the information until the end of the year. But then there's more questions you have to ask. That's the thing. Sometimes it's not that you get something and it takes so long, but that it takes so long and you needed more time to wrap your head around it and the window is closed. So to what degree that's intentional or by design, yeah, I don't know. You tell me.
I think that as a reporter, though, you kind of complain about those things on Twitter, just as the way to be like, like I'm holding you all accountable. Like I needed this info, you didn't give it to me. I want to know what's good. I couldn't use this in the stories. I might as well let you know. Like I tried to get it. That's always a way. Or you can always say that CARES Act funding story I did. Some of that story was actually like, I was really scared that story wasn't going to get published because I just received the data and then there were several lawsuits that were being decided on at the same time. And I just got it in before like we knew that rule was going to be overturned. It wasn't going to be considered as something that school districts had to do. But that was scary for me because I was like, I spent a lot of time on this. It was very wonky. It was something that, like, really my boss had to sit down and kind of have a class with me on. So, it's scary. Yeah.
Cool. So the next question here, once you receive the documents you FOIA'd for, how do you go about including the lived experiences of students to supplement the data, especially since many of them might be minors? What does that engagement process look like?
Sam, do you want to go first since you're the active education reporter?
Okay. I think so how do I put this? Because I pull a lot of data all the time and I'm trying to always figure out what it means, what it looks like. But usually most of the data that I try to pull is actually because a family has said something to me in our interview when I was interviewing them about something else. So, and the way that I even get them into an interview, talk about something else, is that I use like, I've talked to several of like the parent advocacy groups in Chicago or some city and state advocates, and they've directed me to some parents. Then I ask those parents, can they connect me to parents at their school? I'll ask like, who's the LSC person here? I'll just keep going down the line of trying to find more people and ask them about very specific things. Sometimes I'll use what a parent has said to me before with that parent to see if like that experience is the same. And yeah, that's kind of how I do that engagement. And then if something comes up that a parent says to me, I write it down and highlight it, and then I'll go request data on it. Because I feel like I already did the pre-report and we talked about it. I probably went back to the advocate and then went and wrote this FOIA on it. So that's kind of how I do it. I don't know if that's like a good answer, a good system to do it with, but that's me.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of put you on the spot, but
Okay.
that's your answer is also like my answer. I think that trying to get away from just we should be driven by people and by need, right? And if you're don't just ask questions that are just about processes and how they work, that don't like where are the people, I think that it starts with people. The only reason that we want a FOIA or that any of us, Chris, Sam, me, like ever send a FOIA is because of people, because there's some impact or harm that we're trying to understand, right? So I think that's like the North Star. But when it comes to, but I think beyond that, sometimes when you're dealing with the district, often you need a level of access. You need access to youth and to teachers and to settings, right? You're trying to write that scene in your story of youth learning in a new program or a new lab or something, right? You have to go through CPS comms to have that access, or through like a principal. Having relationships with principals is like the number one. I mean, yeah, a principal has a lot of power and discretion. I think ultimately CPS comms and the higher ups will always have some say. But I think that beyond that, I'll say I don't necessarily go walking around outside of school, just asking children questions, probably not a good look. And also just don't do that. If it's not a space or a setting, I mean, that you have that relationship in, or where there are adults who know you, I think we already know that's creepy. I think that community groups, I found, I think, again, it goes back to the story I did about Ogden Jenner, the Ogden School Jenner merger. And there are Cabrini Green, a lot of those projects, I mean, those buildings are gone. A lot of folks are, have moved, but there's still such a strong fiber of community there, and love among people, and connections that you wouldn't believe. So, when you start with people, I think that's just always the number one rule. Think of how FOIA can be a tool for people. How can it be a process that benefits and builds power for people? And if you do that, you'll never lose the lived experience, because you know why you're there already. But yeah.
Yeah, I would just second all of that. And I would just add, at Chicago Lawyers Committee, working with the community is really important to us. And so we don't really look at it as a means of us going out into the community and finding people for something that we're trying to do. We're a tool for the community. We're a hammer for you all to put nails into whatever it is you're targeting. So I think it's important, as folks have said throughout the conversation, not only to build trust with community partners, but also to let community partners know that we're here to support and hopefully help create or help provide that kind of resolution or solution to problems that folks might be facing. So we need to be directed. We need to be told what's impacting, what's hurting, what's harming you, community members, and we do our best where we're able and where we have some knowledge or some kind of tools that we might be able to share to support you in hopefully correcting that, or at least providing some kind of assistance. So we are at your disposal, and we encourage folks to reach out to us to assist in whatever way that we possibly can.
Thank you all so much for that. Next question, how would you engage students who are at the college level who are concerned about retaliation if they speak out?
Short answer for me would be to consult with a legal nonprofit in your local area and see if there are any laws or any kind of claims that might be arising out of that particular situation.
I really wish there was a reporter here who focuses on higher education, because there are just so many issues there that you really just cannot get at, especially when it comes to the private schools. Some things you can get out with the public schools, because the schools have to collect that data and they have to distribute that, give that data out. But that's a hard one. I just remember being a community reporter and covering some of the grad school students unionizing, and just how fearful they were to really talk to the media about some of the issues that they were going through in terms of how much they was getting paid to work there, what their work actually looked like. And I can understand it, so, college and universities now, with the level of surveillance that they do with students, and I graduated from college in 2017, I remember some of the things that definitely happened to students on my campus, and I can only imagine what it looked like for other students now, as these schools have grown more, that their ability to surveillance or see what their students are doing. So yeah.
I think there has to be some value in the person responding to you and allowing the engagement, right? I guess that's one big part of it. If we think about, I often think about why talk to me? Why should this person talk to me? because we often expect access. I think when you start asking yourself, why should they? I think it's a different approach. And then the other part is safety, the basic universal thing that we all want. It's the number one thing on my list. I want to be safe first. You can't have anything without safety. So you can't talk to someone and quote them who has reason to fear for their safety in any kind of way, whatever retaliation they fear, without understanding, I guess, what safety means to them. And maybe you can get at an arrangement in your story that allows for some measure of safety that they're comfortable with. I think that that said, these are generalities, and I want to know more specifically about the concern of the person. I always ask people who don't want to speak on the record, just tell me what it is that you fear. Like, it's like, what compromises you here, or what is it that you're concerned about? And I think that sometimes you can learn from that person who still, after you say all that, says, you know what, no, I'm straight, I still don't want to talk. You can still learn from that person and be connected to a community, or maybe that helps you build rapport with the community of folks who there is need and maybe more willingness to speak out on. A lot of times the person who you get on the record is the fifth person you've tried to get to talk, right? So that's, I think, one big part of the engagement, that it's not something you can fly in and fly out with. It's like, again, some of these things for stories that I've worked on, it's like 6 months trying to kind of, get someone to kind of talk to you about something, but people know you're there. They're passing your number around. You're like a known entity at the LSC meetings. You're showing up, they see you at the board meeting when they go to complain about something. It's like, okay, I guess this is a fixture, and I guess they are actually concerned. So I think that at the level of a college, though, I don't, I haven't reported in that space. So again, a bit abstract. But I think I always just lean back to relationships. So much of what we do is just about, can you establish a good relationship? That's often like the barrier, and why maybe we don't get records from the school district sometimes. Okay.
Absolutely. The next question, we're gonna do a couple more and then we're gonna wrap it up here. How do you find the FOIAs others have filed to an entity?
So when a school district or the state has a board meeting, when you go to their agenda documents, you can see in their agenda where it says like FOIA log. And I always do that for the State Board of Education's monthly meeting. They have it, I think, every third Wednesday or something like that. You could check their calendar just in case I'm getting it confused with CPS, whatever. And then you can look and pull that document up. And every school district, that's pretty much where you can find their FOIA log.
Cool. Next question here. How do you FOIA yourself for educational records, and is there an expiration date to FOIA? For example, can you FOIA high school records from 40 years ago?
I don't have an answer to that. Sometimes there are some limitations for how far back you can go in data, but I'm not sure if that applies to FOIA requests in school records.
You mean like getting your like transcripts or something? Or like, cause it's like FOIA your own. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really know much about this. In terms of like any statute, I imagine if there's like all records that a public body holds that are in some form you can get at, you'd be surprised, I guess, if you know what you're looking for and that it should be there. I don't know. I would love if there was a specific mystery here we were trying to solve of a 40-year-old record. This would be, yeah, I wish if there's that extra part of the question, I think we could probably drill down on if that's something that would be there or not, but.
Cool. Next question here. How do you use our own personal data gathered from FOIA to report and use to gain community trust? think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but feel free to touch on this. Anything you want to add to that? If not, we are about 1 minute away, so we're going to wrap it up here. If you have any other questions, please feel free to, well, we can actually, I'm sure we can still answer them outside of this as well. We can upload recordings and stuff, but I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you so much to the panelists here for joining us and sharing your knowledge. Additionally, to those watching on Swapcard as well, thank you all for watching. That's pretty much like a wrap on FOIA Fest. So thank you all for making this happen. We actually have closing remarks in about 5 minutes, so please feel free to join us there. But yeah, thank you all again. Any last minute things you all want to share out, like your Twitters or anything you want to share?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter, send me an email, talk to me about anything. I try to make myself available to answer whatever question I can for folks.
Stay safe, and injusticewatch.org. Injustice Watch, pretty easy to remember, right? .org. And that's all I'll shout out. I'll leave my personal Twitter out of it.
Just want to say thank you. Chris at Chicago Lawyers Committee, feel free to check us out. We can't make any guarantees or promises about anything, but we certainly try to help and support folks as best we can. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation and great being on this great panel.
Absolutely. Great. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Can you make me host again so I can end the YouTube live stream?
Bye.
Also, yeah, bye, y'all. Y'all are good to go. Thank you.
Cool.
What was your question?
Can you make me host again so that I can end the YouTube live stream? Or you can end it yourself too.
How do I do that?
Here, how about you click more at the end at the,
Okay.
yeah.
Stop live stream?
At the bottom, you'll see